And we're back. Welcome to I Heard You When You Said, the podcast where everything is made up and the points don't matter. I am Justin Carroll, not a doctor, not a therapist, just your resident caffeine expert. And I'm here with my co-host, Stacey Hansen, who's your resident caffeine consumption expert. Stacey, what's going on?
Good morning, my friend. I love that you're the expert and I'm just the consumer. The consumer.
I'm just trying to make sure people know, what they're getting into as they hit play today.
Well, I have definitely consumed a fair amount of caffeine this morning. How my day started and 2 hours later look very different. But we are here now.
Okay. Well, can you give us the short version, if there is such a thing?
Well, there's a short version. I decided to start my morning differently because, in all of this transition in our life, my nervous system is feeling the weight of all of that. So I'm like, you know what? Let's do things differently. So instead of coffee this morning, I made myself some peppermint tea. And then I went and took a bath and I used 2 of my favorite bath bombs. And I took my new book. And so at 6:00 this morning, I was taking a bath and doing breath work and reading a book. I should have lit a candle. I didn't do that. Even to the point that my husband walked in this morning. He's like, well, didn't walk in and expect to see that. That's not where I am at 6:00 in the morning. It's not what I'm typically doing at 6:00. He's like, okay, I kind of tell how she's doing today. And then went to go see my kid at work, and I've had a traditional Italian macchiato, taught him how to make an ice shake and espresso, and sampled some dark beer, all by 9:30 a.m. this morning. So there was a very stark contrast between 6:30 and 9:30, and here you are with a fully caffeinated version of me.
Man, I mean, nothing like 400 milligrams of caffeine to the dome, followed by a blood alcohol content, that is also rising on the back end of that. I mean, I really can't think of a better combination pre 7 a.m., 8 a.m. time frame.
I don't know that I've ever sipped alcohol at 9 a.m. before, like ever. I won't say ever. I mean, in the last 30 years, I'm sure at a time before that it was true. But if anybody wants to know how I'm doing, there you go. That's how she's handling everything right now, ladies and gentlemen.
You know what? I think you're in a much better way than you were the last Monday that I talked to you. And not that anything, all that's understood between us, so that doesn't have to be explained to the world. But the fact that you started with such a beautiful intention of, you know what, we're going to go the herbal route today. And then that caffeine just straight up put you in a chokehold, son. Also, too, it wasn't like you went to Starbucks and got all this. You had your son practice and make it. So there was also that relational aspect to it. So I'll give you the credit for that one. I can't say that I would have done anything different had it been me and my son and my morning. So
here's where I realized. I was thinking about this because we've gone to Jonathan's new job almost every day now, either to eat or to get a coffee. And it's fascinating to me from a behavior standpoint, right? This new restaurant opens, I get him a job there, and that I will go where my kids work just to see them. When Joshua worked at a lemonade stand, I would drive 15 minutes every time he was working just to get a $6 lemonade. Okay, I don't pay $6 for lemonade. I will spend money on some stupid ass shit all the time. But $6 for lemonade, I probably wouldn't do unless my kid is making the lemonade. So yeah, I was thinking about that as I've literally every day that Jonathan has worked, gone and got a macchiato that he made me.
Hey, there's not too many times you're going to get to take son-made macchiatos, and he can say that, I learned how to make an ice shake and espresso from my mom. So now every patron after you is going to have the secret menu item of a what's the name of the restaurant?
Fire and Vice.
Oh, so appropriate. So first of all, but Fire and Vice secret menu, I Shake an Espresso, Jonathan Hansen edition, right?
Well, I even think we named the drink like Ice Shaken Vice, or Vice Shaken. Like we were coming up with names because
Oh yeah, that would be cool. Yeah,
on the menu, of literally taking the stamp and the Hanson stamp on this really cool new business. It's pizza, beer, smash burgers, and coffee.
what's the town that it's located?
Buellton.
Buellton. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if whoever's listening to this is in or around the area of Buellton, California, driving through the valley, and they find themselves with a hankering for pizza, smash burgers, beer, and the secret menu Vice Shaken Espresso, stop into Fire and Vice and get you some.
Get you some.
What I'm laughing at right now currently is, well, if you're watching this on video, obviously I always have a baby picture of my son Kason behind me, but these books that are stacked up here. So my buddy Clay, and he'll get a crack at this if he listens to this episode, is he was looking at one of our shorts that you posted on Instagram, and he like took screenshots and zoomed in on the shelf, and he goes, I need to know what these are. So I just came in here to the office and I sent him pictures of them. I'm like, this one, this one. He goes, I figured they were like more important than others because they're behind you. I go, not a chance. They're literally the ones that I have either read the most recently or ordered and haven't read yet. So I just stack them up because I keep them close because it's easier to access those than the ones that are the library of sorts, if you will, is in the guest room. That's kind of the decoration beside the Murphy bed in there. That's where I keep the main contents of the book collection. So if you're watching, this is not the most important books that I have, but they're definitely, a collection of good books.
I gotta tell you, Clay cracks me up. Clay's investment of what we put online is gold to me.
You know
Absolute what? Gold. I don't want it to be different. We
love Clay. We love Clay.
Because Clay brings up the things ain't nobody else is going to say. And I love it. Now it kind of, like how Taylor Swift puts Easter eggs out for her fan base. I don't know if Clay listens to the podcast or not, but I kind of want to mess with Clay a little bit and just do things to see if Clay will pick up on it, because nobody else cares to the level that Clay does of the things.
Well, like when you get here and we start recording together, most likely right in the same place, that if we can make it to where there is a like wider background, like an area where you can actually see more behind us, then it would be funny, like you said, to hide, like have things in there, and it incentivizes people to go and watch it too if they they want to go find out what's new.
I already have ideas of how to mess with Clay in some of our content now. There's just going to be like Clay Easter eggs to see if he picks up on them for a man that I've never met.
Not yet.
I'm so invested in this game right now. I'm so invested in this level of fun.
Well, I am also caffeinated because I just got my shipment of Screaming Freedom.
Oh.
Which I owe you a few from stealing some of yours from the shipment you had sent to my house of the Summer Raid and Grape Smash flavors.
I love that you think you owe me. That what is not shared? I took a bottle of your wine. Okay. It's our wine, but that's fine. I had some of your bourbon. Okay. It's our bourbon.
That is so funny that you say that, because literally yesterday, I think, was it yesterday? Yeah, we had one of the like grape flavors or something while we were going to Costco, and she goes, how many of those are you going to drink of Stacy's? I go, bro, I will give Stacy as many energy drinks back as she wants. It's not that big a deal. And so, because I know, that's not how you operate. And then last night I was like, hey, I love when Paige makes me old fashions. Not that it's any better than I could make it, but it tastes better when it's like when your mom makes you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? It tastes way better.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's way better.
Anyway, so I asked her for Father's Day, right? Can you make me a old fashioned?" And she goes, "Well, what am I going to drink? Because there's no just spare bottles of wine sitting around. There is your wine in the closet." And she goes, "Well, the only thing left is Stacy's wine." I said, "Well, heaven forbid we pop any of that open, right?" I said, "I guess you're just going to have to not drink." And so that's exactly what she did. She didn't drink. She just let me drink while we watched the show.
She totally could have opened it.
Oh, I know. But hey, you know what, Stacy? I would let her make that decision. I was not making that decision for her. So if that's what she chose to do, that's what she chose to do, and that is what it is.
I also would have never known. And even if I did know, I wouldn't care. I'd be thankful that she enjoyed it.
No.
Whatever.
We know which ones the sacred ones are that are meant to be shared, and which one's the one you're like, I don't give a damn if you drink it, throw it at a car, go take it to a friend and give it to them. Like, whatever you want to do it.
Yeah.
But
we have the sacred ones. The 2 wolves are the sacred ones. Everything else is.
Those are in a box. We can't even see those. Those are out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, in the guest room closet.
Yep.
Where the books are.
AKA Stacy's
room.
Stacy's second home.
For one more trip. For one more trip.
So bring us to, catch us up on first of all, what we're talking about today, but how we got to what we're talking about today, because it was something that you have been jamming on in your brain, rolling it around, flipping it over, pulling it apart, putting it back together to try to figure out how you think, what you think about it. And it is something that comes up a lot with clients on a daily, weekly basis, and even among us in different ways. We don't maybe explicitly say it. I think we kind of assume it to a degree. So let us know what that looks like today.
Well, there's things that you and I talk about privately that usually come out on this podcast in some way, but this is one of the things we did talk about privately, and then it was said to me. And so the thing we're talking about today is really taking quit off the table. Like taking quit completely off the table in every area of life. And at different times we've talked about it personally, professionally, which I'd love to talk about it because I heard you say it on a call the other day in regards to us and professionally. We'll get to later. But how it came up that I wanted to talk about it this morning is that I was on a phone call with our friend Kaz in Australia. And for those of you who are listening, if you don't know our friend Kaz, it's the Love Conquers podcast. You need to go listen. 2 episodes in particular, the one we did, which was amazing, which we're going to rebroadcast. I also recorded a podcast with her and her 3 other best girlfriends, which is hysterical, which we may or may not rebroadcast. We might just put the link to it because it's a little bit spicier of content than you will hear Justin and I publicly talk about. If you're privately taping our conversations, sure. Or just happen to see us out in public and rogue, these are conversations. But for the internet, this was 4 women in a room with Kaz's husband talking about female friendships, relationships. It was so good. And some of it was so wrong and so right. Go listen.
Is that one out? Is that one out?
Oh, it's out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll put the link to it in the episode or in the description of this episode, so that way people can reference it since it's been mentioned.
And so for people who like you and I, you are highly talked about in this podcast because other than Kaz, no one else has a male best friend. And so we were talking about what the difference of dynamic is having a male best friend versus a female best friend, because I don't typically act like a girl. And so for people who are interested in you and I, there are you and I stories on this female friendship podcast. Because where would I go that you're not with me? Where do I go that I'm not telling a story about something we're doing, you're doing, or what happened with us?
Right.
Bring it back. Is that Kaz invited me to be a part of her new podcast with Rachel Bradshaw, who owns Iconic Jiu-Jitsu. She's a black belt. Her and Rachel are doing a women's jiu-jitsu podcast, and it's called The G-Spot. So named appropriately.
But spelled how?
G-I So it's like a
So that would be
gi.
called the gi spot.
Yeah, but we're not calling it the gi spot. I mean, it is the gi spot, but that's not how we're referring to it. It's just the G
Okay.
spot.
I was just making sure that people understood the reference so that it wasn't like,
Yeah.
oh, she's a jiu-jitsu black belt and she also happens to like G spots, right? No, there's like
Yes.
a double entendre there.
The double entendre on purpose, which gives you the nature of the female of the Friends podcast,
Right.
of how much of the conversation was. So they invited me to come speak on this podcast. And where this comes into our podcast today is in talking to Kaz yesterday. I asked her, I said, Kaz, why do you want me on this podcast? Because it wasn't just one episode. They want me on lots of episodes for perpetuity. They have planned out. And so in talking to her yesterday, I said, you've got a black belt, which is Rachel, a purple belt, which is yourself, and maybe the world's longest white belt holder with no stripes, Stacy Hansen. Of 5 years of inconsistent training, still here. Why would you want me on this podcast? I don't understand. And she's like, that's exactly why I want you, because you don't quit. And I went, And it got me thinking, not just personally, but the things that we have conversations about every day, is that typically when somebody's not good at something or they haven't seen success in something in a short amount of time, they quit. But 5 years is a long time to not be good at something and still keep coming back. That I did take quit off the table. It's something that I personally want to do. It's more fun because we get to do it together. So I'm really interested to see of what this next season of our lives look together when we have each other as accountability. There's no reason not to go to jiu-jitsu now. Neither one of us have an out. I mean, I didn't have an out when it was 5 minutes away, right? But what happens in both of our jiu-jitsu games when it is just, okay, this is our Wednesday and Friday. So bringing it back of taking quit off the table was a conversation I wanted to have, because we naturally operate this way. But it's also the thing that I hear the most of people afraid that they're going to fail. And when we talk about it in regards to a client perspective, it's how do we keep people engaged long enough to see the miracle of the work, which is the thing I want to talk about today.
I agree. We do a lot of it almost naturally, but that's not even really the right word. I think we do it. That's the prerequisite for getting involved with anything that we get involved in, is that we've taken quit off the table, because we typically evaluate it in terms of, this is something that we really want to do, right? And there's nuance to the language here, right? You could argue that you could pivot something into something else, and technically that's not quitting it. You're just taking that energy and redirecting it. And that's also true. But for the context of today's conversation, let's talk about a singular focus, something like weight loss, which we deal with a lot of people, or maybe it's a health issue that you have been perpetually dealing with for, 1 year is a long time, but most of the people who come to us have been dealing with things for way longer than 1 year. And so in that struggle, you start to question if it is worth it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to your jiu-jitsu example, there's a lot of times when you could have just, in one of your breaks from the gym or one of your, life transitions or whatever it is, to say, you know what, there's just really not space in my life for that anymore. And I am permanently laying down my gi and I'm not going to go back to jiu-jitsu, which we don't like that concept of the last time doing anything. Like, it's never my last time, because you don't really know when your last time is. So we try not to say, I'll never do that again, because we really don't know where our interest is going to be in, 5 weeks, much less 5 months, 5 years, and so on. So we have taken quit off the table in a lot of aspirational ways, but also in a lot of ways that can beat you down. And I really like the way that you described it to me earlier today when we were on the phone, about the tree analogy that you gave me. I think it was a tree.
Oh,
Marks on a tree.
I'm like, I gave you a tree analogy. It was
Yeah,
early. That was
it
before the
was.
caffeine.
Well, I'm not gonna, do like you do me, where you like try to lead me to it, and I still don't know what you're talking about. Then you have to tell me anyway. I'm just gonna tell you what you said.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so, to bring it back into focus is when we say take quit off the table, we mean don't concern yourself with whether you're going to continue or not. Go ahead and make an assumption that you are, and that way you're free to plan and use that energy toward productive action, as opposed to should I stay or should I go?
Yeah. I remember the tree analogy now, and I don't want to miss it because I think it gives people a really good visual. When we were talking about it this morning, is that every time you quit, you usually know you've already decided to quit before you actually do it. You usually know you're going to quit right on the onset, and you're just like, how long until I don't quit? Like
Right.
you've committed to something, but in your heart, you're gonna like, I'm just gonna see how long I'll do this. But knowing that you don't have, I like the word stick to itiveness, like you ain't sticky to it. And then every time you quit, it's like a mark. Like if you were literally etching into a tree, and you have this old story and literally this piece of wood or a living tree where you can look at, I quit here, I quit here, and I quit here, and all you have is quitting stacked behind you. And so when you go to start something, you're already predispositioned not to finish it because you're looking over your shoulder at a tree that literally bears the marks of all the times that you didn't follow through. And at some point, you just need to use it as firewood and burn it up. And we've talked about this on podcasts before, that old stories, you can't read an old story while writing a new one. And so I think about one of the biggest fears people have, especially in coming to work with us. And I even saw an old story showing up in me in regards to us in this move yesterday. Got my ass called out by 2 friends yesterday. You don't even know about this yet. That if you don't take the risk, then you won't actually ever know. But the fear that people have is that I'm going to fail before I start. So they don't start because all they can see is their past failures. They don't see the small successes. I don't know that there's a time that there hasn't been somebody who's come to work with us, and this is just a work thing, that hasn't been their fear. Is this really going to work? And I was thinking about this more. Their concern is never if we're going to work. The concern is like, oh, I don't know if Stacy and Justin like are equipped enough, if they're educated enough, if they're knowledgeable enough. The onus has never been on us not being enough. It's, can we move them out of their way long enough that they can make believers out of themselves? And I thought about how interesting that is, that the trust that we've built over time with people, that their fear is never about us. It's still their insecurity in themselves of, can they do it?
I like what you said about a lot of people come to the action, come to the table, or come to the process. I guess that would be with assumptions of past experiences. So instead of assuming that they won't quit, like we have conditioned and continue to condition ourselves to believe, they assume that they will. They assume subconsciously that this is just another vain attempt at whatever it is that they've tried a million times before in the past, because of the marks on that tree in their mind of, you've never been able to do this before. So why is this time any different? And that's actually a question we ask a lot of our clients when they come to us and say, why is this time different? Like, why do you want to do this right now? Because we're not here to waste your time. And we want to make sure that you get the most return on the investment that you're going to make in yourselves and the investment you're going to make in us. And if now is not the right time, we need to know that up front, right? And so why is this time different? And so when you start to dig, when you get asked that question and you start to dig into it a little bit more, most of the time people find a couple things. They have what we call the gift of desperation, which is like, I don't know what else to do. I've tried what I feel like is everything, and I've tried what I feel like is everything multiple times even, and I am just desperate for an answer. And, placed in the wrong hands, that can go south really quickly because people can take advantage of people who are desperate. But we think of it as a gift because it allows you to set aside, or it helps you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to right off the bat, but it helps you to set aside past notions of whatever you thought was going to work or whatever did work in some partial way or at some point in time, so that you can actually dig down to the root of what the solution is going to be. So at that desperate enough point, people have there is no turning back.
Mm-mm.
And that's the gift of desperation. Well, that leads into what you alluded to earlier, which was believing long enough to see the miracle happen. That's the number one reason of anyone that we've ever had come through, which our coaching practice is still young. So the people who have been here are still here, but anybody that we've coached in the past separately or together, the number one thing that happened, quote unquote, and this is a shared responsibility of coaches and clients, is that in some way, shape, or form, they didn't stay around or stay on one thing long enough to see the change take place. And that's hard to know with some people because they do live a life of instability. So you're trying to coach a method that requires stable ground with someone who doesn't have stable ground to stand on. It's a very hard, nearly impossible thing to do. You do the best you can while you can and move forward from there. But the other thing in that believing long enough to see the miracle happen is the belief part, because you don't have any work to back it up. So you have to put work in first. Then the belief will start to come with a little bit of work and repetition put in. And after a while, when you stay long enough, ability actually starts to show up. Then you don't have to try to purposefully believe so hard, because you can just look at your track record and go, well, I have the ability to lose weight. I have the ability to go to sleep when I'm supposed to. I have the ability to control my hunger and my food choices and how I talk to people and all the plethora of things that we get into. But, following that ability becomes a belief in the next level, right? So after a while, people get very high ability in one area. They want to move and take that ability and parlay it into belief in another area that they weren't even close to, right? Something that was outside of arm's reach. Whereas maybe we were working on something that was a little bit more ground level in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. And this could be anything from weight loss to improving a relationship with a spouse to improving a relationship with themselves, which is pretty much the central tenet of most of what we do, to redefining boundaries with parents. That's one of the more recent conversations we've had with a client. And so we believe that when things are applied long enough, they will work. Enough reps will happen. As a matter of fact, I have a quote from Principles, the book Principles by Ray Dalio, if anybody's ever heard of that book. But algorithms are principles in action on a continuous basis. That's one of the little lines in that book. And so what that means is what works is what always work applied continually, right? It's not new. There's nothing new under the sun. It's a application of a fundamental principle of life or economics or science or your body, whatever it is. It's the continuous application of that principle that becomes what people see as like, this is the new thing to succeed. It's like, it's not new. It's just been rebroadcasted essentially, right?
People believe something already, right? Whether you believe that it's not going to work or it is going to work, both are true. I think it was Henry Ford that said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right.
Right.
You're right. And so it goes back to, what if it were possible? What if it were possible? And then bringing hope back onto the table. Because at the end of the day, belief is anchored on a hope of a different outcome. or a continued outcome that looks like you want it to be, that isn't absent of obstacles. And so in any stimulus, I look at even a long-term relationship, right? So what are we? Ted and I are like 26 years and having conversations now that are super challenging. They're also so great to have because then you get to test the threshold of what you build. How do you know the strength of something unless you occasionally test it? And it, or at some seasons, perpetually test it. I mean, we've lived through that as well, where it was a perpetual test. That if you don't ever test your belief and risk the outcome being different than you think, then you just stay on the hamster wheel. And that is the most disheartening thing to me. I don't want to live like that, but I don't want anybody else to live like that either. We were on a client call. I can't remember which one. I wish I did, because it was a day that you had like fire in your belly, which is one of my favorite days, where I'm not sure how to get more of it. But like, you were talking to one of our clients about us professionally as a company. Like, we won't fail because we've taken quit off the table. And it was one of those reminders that when you decide and you stay decided, then it doesn't really matter what the obstacle is, because failure isn't an option.
The way I look at it is we have enough resources to pivot in any direction, right? We know enough people.
Mm-hmm.
We have, a little bit of finances. We have each other. We have supportive families. We have so much abundance. We have a lot of faith in all areas of our life that what's gonna stop us, right? Short of a complete, economic and grid meltdown, because this is how we talk to people. But even if that was the case, we'd go, start community-wide efforts instead of, worldwide efforts. But it's just this unshakableness, like you said, this really, like you said, this stick-to-itiveness is, one of our favorite words, but it's also like be unmesswithable. Really is one of the tenets that we try to get into people's head without explicitly saying that. A lot of the times is, how can we be what I call normal face about 99% of things that we do, right? Middle ground, right? Not necessarily too excited, and definitely not too down about anything that happens. That's not an easy thing to do, and it's not expected for you to be perfect at it. But on the whole, it's kind of like a batting average, right? If you get a hit a third of the time in professional baseball, is a killer batting average. And just looking at it from that perspective is like, okay, well, if we can stay normal face, and that I'm using a visual descriptor to describe an attitude. If we can stay normal face, which we describe this as a mindset continuum in the work that we do, but if we can stay normal face, then we have the best chance of figuring out solutions to our problems and moving through life, not in a kind of in like the sky is falling mentality. We don't want to move through life in that way. But one of the things that I think is something that people struggle with, and something that we recently had a discussion about with somebody who wants to work with us, is they're afraid of living out of line temporarily to achieve a constantly returning long-term outcome. They're afraid of breaking the mold of what they've done for the last 10, 20, 50 years because of what people will think, what people will say, what they will think or say about themselves, the lack of support that they might have at home, whatever it is, right? I mean, just make up a list of consistent and typical reasons why we can't. What they don't understand is that once you're on the other side of that living out of line, once you're on the other side of determining what your existence is going to look like, you never have to worry about it again. It's a constantly returning outcome. You work on your health for 1 year, 2 years of your life on a consistent, focused basis, and that 2 years of investment can leave you in a state where you literally have to do maintenance level activities for the rest of your life. And when you do have something happen, like a sickness or an injury or whatever, you have the tools that you've relied on before to bring you back to baseline. And so I think that's what people don't see at the beginning, is they can only see their desperation. They can't see like the gift that is, like the living out of balance, so to speak, right? If that's how you want to think about it, is so necessary. There's just no other way to do it, because if you try to do it one step at it, like steady wins the race, you're going to get discouraged before you actually see things happen. So you do have to have a little bit of a forward leaning, extreme, if you want to use that word, bias to action. Otherwise, you're never going to get anything done long enough for you to actually stay with it. And these are the people that we admire now in our culture, are like people that some people will call them obsessed, right? I was just listening to a podcast on Arnold Schwarzenegger from a book that was written by a woman who had like a 6-year relationship with him. And she was like, most goal-oriented person I'd ever seen in my entire life. And I knew after a certain amount of time, I would never have the importance in his life that whatever he was doing right now, right? Because he just parlayed his success in bodybuilding into a success in movies, into a success in politics. And he knew it, because he was like, why would I want to be like, oh, you're a different person? Absolutely, I am. Why would I want to be the same? Why would I work this hard to be the same person at the end of the day? It doesn't make any sense.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
We do become different people. And why would we work so hard to remain the same? And so that is one of the challenges that I think, well, I know that I faced personally. People like, you're different. Yep, that was the goal. That was the goal.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working that hard and you're the same, then what are you doing? How did you word it? That this forward bias, you had a word that you just said was like, you have to be almost, I don't want to say delusionally biased, but like so committed, biased to where you're going that you almost don't see anything else. Like, so Arnold Schwarzenegger is a great example. And I think of even where we are today, like we trust and verify. We're actually really conservative. For even people who watch us, they're like, hey, they're big risk takers. I think we're moderate risk takers. I think we're confident in our ability and we trust and verify, but I wouldn't necessarily say we're risky.
Well, it's compared to what? That's the question that you have to ask, right? Compared to somebody who works a 9 to 5 and lives a pretty comfortable life. Yeah, we're probably pretty risky compared to other entrepreneurs. Not at all.
No. And maybe it's just that I don't see risk that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's I'm going to make it work or I've never not, or that bias, that undiscriminate bias of if we change our bias, then you actually can change the outcome of the situation that you're looking at. So I was thinking about this because my morning has been spent a little differently, other than starting with a bath, which I can't tell you the last thing I did, but when we're talking about biases, and when you invest in your health for a short amount of time, it becomes organic and you don't think about it. So I can feel my body responding to the current level of stress that it's under. And none of it is necessary. It's not bad stress. Some of it is transition, and transition takes energy and work. Some of it is repairing things that had been broken. Some of it is just finally getting to see the fruitfulness of all the work that we've done, and having a son with autism who every single summer I forget what it's like to transition into summer, like I haven't been doing this for 16 years. To have Isaiah as my shadow every waking moment of the day. Like, okay, I'm fine. That I knew that I needed to do something different with travel in front of me. It wasn't that I made myself go take a bath. It wasn't that I purposely went, if I don't curate my wellness, my health right now. I'm going to pay for this 2 or 3 weeks from now. So I actually need to completely rearrange how I'm operating, which wasn't hard to do because I've spent so much time doing it. Like I think about your morning, you're like, we talked at what, 7:30? You're like, oh, I'm going to go work out and I'm going to do this. It was a part of your day. It's just a part of breathing right now, who we are. We've been doing this long enough. Not that there's not days that we don't want to train or things like that, but the investment we've made really early on just becomes the next organic piece. So there wouldn't ever be a day that or a week that we'd be like, I'm not training this week, or I'm not moving this week. It would be like, I'm not breathing this week.
Right.
That you do something long enough and you actually don't, it just becomes a part of your life and you don't think about it anymore because it becomes a part of who you are and you are different. And it should be. So when we talk about taking quit off the table, it now, for where we are, becomes hard not to quit. So what would you say about when somebody, or even us, I can't think of anything that we've tried other than like business stuff that we're like, yeah, that didn't work. We're not going to do that. Or
Right.
schedule wise, that when you try something and you commit to it, but it's not a good fit. Because what I don't want to do is miscommunicate, hey, quit off the table. And I mean, here's why, especially not knowing who's listening to us, like a fad diet or a crappy coach, or you were not aligned with a friendship that like, well, Stacey and Justin say quit off the table, and I have this, forward facing bias, and I'm going to make this work. What's the line of demarcation, so to speak, that you use personally to be like, okay, this isn't a quit. I don't want this anymore. Or how do you speak to that? Because it's very easy to make this really one sided of like, I'm not going to take quit off the table and I'm going to make this work no matter what the cost, to, hey, this doesn't serve me anymore. This isn't a good fit.
It's good addition because part of me is taking advantage of the fact that we're very self-reflective. So when we say don't take quit off the table, we mean don't take, or when we say take quit off the table, what we're saying is don't quit on the stuff that you know that matters. Then that begs the question, well, how do you know what matters? Well, it's regular reflection. It's daily, weekly, asking yourself questions of, is what I'm doing today the most important thing that I could be doing at this moment in time? Right? What's important now? And so you're not going to be able to answer that question with 100% certainty at the beginning because you've never done it before. You may have never self-reflected on anything. You just caught a shiny object and went gung-ho, and then when you jacked it up, you just quit, and you thought it didn't affect you. Well, you do that, over the course of half a lifetime, and it definitely affects you. And so, if not mentally, which it does, but definitely physically. So the question then becomes is, how do you know what not to quit on and what to quit on? Essentially, it becomes a energy management at that point. It becomes focus and attention management, because the first thing you have to account for is the things that you are responsible for. So, for example, wouldn't be a very good situation, but I'm going to say I can't, because that's where my priorities lie. Is I can't sacrifice too much time with my family to build a business, because that's not how my priorities are aligned. So I have to be reflective of, is this project, how much energy, focus, and maintenance is this project going to take? Because I have to account for all my responsibilities first. So once the family, fitness, faith, those type of things, relationships, once those are accounted for, then and only then can I use the spare space, so to speak, to go after something that I desire personally, and either for myself, for my families, or whatever it is. So the reason I'm giving that preamble is to say that is where you need to come to first before you decide if what you're investing in is worth how much extra, right, effort is appropriate before you either say, this ain't the direction, I still want this thing, but maybe not this way, or do I still want this thing at all, right? You may have thought, you wanted to be a artist, so you invested a year or something into learning how to paint, learning how to draw, learning how to do whatever, some artistic endeavor, only to get at the end of it that you're like, I don't know if I want this anymore. So is that waste of time? Well, not necessarily. We had to focus on the soft skills, so to speak, that we were learning along the way, right? You learned how to focus on something. You learned how to compartmentalize things. You learned how to bite off little pieces so that you could build the skill. Now you have a skill that you may not actually use right now. Like you don't want that anymore. So but you need to parlay the things learned into the next thing is what I'm getting at. So don't think of it as, even if it's a crappy coach, don't quit on my coach, right? Even if it's a crappy program, don't quit on my program. Even if it's a relationship that hasn't served me in a long time, I don't need to quit on that relationship. You need to do your due diligence in reflecting on, do you hold the same values you did when you started this thing? And is this still worth your time, energy, money, etc.? Once you have that judgment, once you've made that judgment based on that reflection, then you can take and parlay into whatever it is that you do next. But don't look at that time as wasted. Look at that time as a learning experience, right? I call it a tuition payment, right? You learn what you didn't want to do or how you didn't want to do it. Doesn't mean it was wasted time, right? Like I don't want to go do more endurance events at this current point in time, but I don't see the ones that I've done in the past as wasted time. I learned something about myself. We had a whole episode on that. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's where that would be my, long story long answer to say there is a time and a place to go, this ain't it. Or it could look like not right now. I'm not in a place where that makes sense for my life right now. And you can come back to it later with fresh eyes. So that's how I think about it.
So what would you say? Because it's pretty common in our industry, you only fail if you quit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at failure very differently. I'd love to say that failures are my greatest teacher. And so people are afraid to fail, but you actually have to fail. It's just not stopping after you fail. Like failure isn't final. And at the end of the day, everything we're talking about is a fear-based reaction, right? What if I don't follow through? What if I fail? What if all of this? And a way to protect ourselves from getting hurt like all day long. So you were really clear. And I love the words that you said about knowing what your values are. So you know where quit doesn't come off the table. I was thinking about that because we use the word organically between us a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do you explain what isn't necessarily explainable? Like there weren't a lot of things that we talked about. I mean, we knew what our values were independently just for the nature of our friendship. But I'm looking at like, okay, how does this work so well? Well, our values were the same, but we didn't have a meeting one day and you didn't go, Stacey, could you lay out your values for me to see if we're in alignment? A lot of this happened just in the context of relationship and watching each other's lives and go, oh, her family is a priority to her. Oh, her health is a priority to her. Her faith is a priority to her. Caring for people is a priority to her. And so then it was sometimes those priorities have got out of alignment. And there are things that I have stopped. And I think stopping something is very different than quitting something that were no longer helpful. So how would you give people, and even me sometimes, the ability to go, okay, the difference between stopping and quitting something is what?
The difference between stopping and quitting something is your intention. That's all it is. It's the same reason why you stop, or it's the same reason why you started something in the first place. If your intention is to quit this thing because it's too hard, and it's just not for me, well, my question would be for you can you honestly look back and reflect on your effort to say that you gave it your best shot? If the answer is no, then that's the type of quitting we're trying to take off the table. If the answer is yes, well, then we need to pivot into what is our intention in stopping this thing? Are we stopping this thing because we know that we can actually pour in that focus and those resources to a different intention, different outcome that we want? Or are we stopping this thing because it is a detriment to us physically, mentally, otherwise? And that is the thing that we need to separate from so that we can gather ourselves and redirect into a different intention. You'll never go wrong if you bias toward action. You'll never go wrong if you bias toward action. So if you think you want to try something, just try it. Just do whatever the minimum threshold amount is, right? It's like me learning how to play guitar. I hadn't picked it up in quite a while as we sit here and talk, but it's not, I'm not disappointed that I tried it and it's still on the table. It's just something that I'm not focused on right now because I understand the nature of projects. I understand the nature of seasons, rhythms, those type of things in my life. And it's just, it is what it is right now in terms of time management, schedule management. And there's things that I've got to work on to make it a part of my routine again. The difference there is that I'm not saying that it wasn't even worth me picking up a guitar in the first place. I'm not saying that, because sometimes when you have a bias toward action, you're going to do things for a little bit or a lot of a bit, and you're going to have to scrap the entire project. You're going to go, nope, wasn't a winner this time. But guess what? That doesn't mean you failed. That means you learned. That means you go, well, I know what doesn't work, but I've picked up some things along the way. That's what I'm saying. Pay attention. And you have a bias for action. You can't just go in things blindly. You have to pay attention and go, what am I taking away from this that I can use in other projects and endeavors? And so that's how you ultimately get to the point where the stick-to-itiveness becomes who you are, becomes what your internal bias is. At some point in time, you have a bias for action for a lot of things. And then you start to understand, oh, there's only a couple things that I actually hold very valuable. And so I'm just going to direct my focus towards those things on the whole. There's going to be little things that pop up here and there, but on the whole, I'm going to direct them towards just a few of my values. And then over time, you really get set in a groove, so to speak, of I really only spend my time doing a handful of things. And those handful of things are, I know from life and experience, are serving me on a consistent basis. And so it may just be a maturity thing for a lot of people. They just haven't tried enough shit to be able to say, this does work or this doesn't work for me, and I'm pivoting and I'm finding a different way. But I promise with enough reps, you will figure it out.
I love that. And it all comes down to you can't read the old story. I think about that, like just listening to you talk about it, is that in no point of your guitar telling story were you being like, dude, I'm a jerk. Oh, I'm a failure. This is one more thing I picked up that I didn't get to finish right now. Like, you're like, okay, my priority shifted. I have some other things I was taking care of that moved that seat. I'll come back to it in time. And it's not only the way that you talk to yourself, which is the most important thing. If there's anything that I want people to hear, is there is nobody who talks to you more than you do. Right. There is nobody who talks to you more than you do. And when you change that conversation of, okay, it's not a not ever, it's just not right now. I still want to do that, but right now, this is more important. It gives you the freedom to pick it up again without any like, I quit this. And you're not asking for anybody else's opinion. Like, nobody else is looking at you and be like, yeah, we heard Justin on, podcast 1 say he was picking up the guitar and now he's not. Nobody's like making a moral failure over he chose to parent his kid at home 2 days a week and made our business all around it, and the guitar moved priorities. Nobody's saying that. And so it is that internal conversation that drives action that really takes quit off the table. That was kind of the heart of it this morning. I I'm really curious to see where this conversation goes when people get to hear it. Because I think it'll hit a little bit different of how they perceive what they've quit on or what they didn't stick to long enough in fear of what other people might say, when there's probably one or two people in their lives that have just said something loud enough, long enough that they've made it true. That's usually family or close friends that don't want to see the change in you. Anyway, let them talk. They're going to talk about you either way. Just let them talk.
And you have to decide what is a high leverage activity for you. And when I say that, is you have to decide what you're going to put X amount into and get X times 2 times 10 out of, because that's going to look different for everybody. For example, a lot of people say, listening to an audiobook, you can read a book faster when you listen to it. Okay, that might work for you. Didn't work for me. I mean, I listen to audiobooks sometimes for pleasure, not for learning, because that's not how my brain operates. I need to see it. I need to read it. I need to reread it. I need to underline it, highlight it, take a note on it, say it in my own language, right? I need to flip it around in my head so that I understand what I'm looking at. That's a high leverage activity for me. That's something I'm willing to put, whatever amount of input into, and I'm going to get something out of. So that's going to look different for everybody. So that's not up to other people to judge what is or isn't a high leverage activity for you and what you spend your time and your effort doing. Minus your base responsibilities, right? If you're ignoring base responsibilities, well, then that's something that you have to figure out. You have to figure out how to take care of your base responsibilities, like paying the bills, taking care of children, maintaining relationships, feeding yourself, like that type of stuff. Like, you need to take care of those base responsibilities. After that, though, is where we're going into activities that actually have a long-term benefit and can make your life better. That's what we're referring to here today. So, like you said, the way you're the only person that you go to bed with every night, all the time, right? So you will always talk to yourself. So if you're always talking shit to yourself, well, then you can bet that you're probably not going to get too far too fast. But if you, like I alluded to earlier, have a normal face about it, right? Normal face attitude, normal face. That's why you see me. I know I'm unflinching about the guitar. I'm trying to pick up, learning card magic because it's something that interests me. But it's really, I see it as it's low on the totem pole. It's something that's fun to do when I want to take my mind off of things that are the other things that I'm pursuing, because I like more of kind of a sprint rest strategy rather than just a consistent hammering strategy. But everybody has things that work for them, because I have to find time to invest in things that matter to me. That's why I get up earlier than everybody else in my household, because that's where the most amount of time for me to do high leverage things like read, learn, write, things of that nature. So not saying that's what you need to do. I'm just giving you an example of how I use that time. So,
okay, well, I have two things, because I am going to say it's what people need to do. I'm not going to should people, but there's two things. Relationally, you are the better normal facer than I am. And so when you're like, I'm normal face 90% of the time, I'm like, yeah, you are. And sometimes I'd like a face. Sometimes I'm like, come on, Justin. But it's such a secure baseline, because majority of time and when you said it earlier, that's where problems are solved. Right. So when we're looking at how we respond or react to things, it's that in that I'm unmoved, that's a problem solving solution. The other thing is that what I really want to leave people with as we wrap this with a bow, that sprint rest thing, there is a time to run, and then there's a time to walk, and then there's a time to rest. And that is not what we're taught. That's not what culture teaches. Culture just says run until you're dead. And so where you wouldn't say like, hey, I'm telling other people they need to do this, I actually am. Because there's wisdom in a pace of knowing what you can do in the time of life you're in. I mean, this is what we talk about in the cohort, in seasons, and all of that. So I'm not going to say that it's not wisdom to be followed when people are ready to follow it and do it different. because it's tested and true. It's not just an opinion you had that you woke up on a Tuesday and said, how I do this. Yes, it is how you do it, but it's also sustainable and creates longevity that removes any risk of failure or quit off the table because it's a pace that's for your life. So I will tell people it's necessary because I want them to do it for their life. I want us to do it for our life.
Well, I think we've put that to bed, so to speak. I think that's our final word. So
Yeah.
Until next time, you know where to catch us on the social medias. I'm Farmer to Fitter. That's TO, not the number 2, but Farmer TO Fitter. FITTER. Stacy is Stacy J Hansen. You can find those in the show notes along with the link to our landing page if you want other fun things that we provide. Also, there will be a link to the all women's episode that Stacy referred to earlier with our friends Matt and Kaz over in Australia. And we'll see y'all next time.